Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we are looking at the Gitrog monster, ye old giant frog horror. So this is a 5 mana Golgari commander. It's a 6/6 with Death Touch, but that doesn't matter. The parts that matter are the abilities. So at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog unless you sack a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and then the most important ability, whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So that last one right there is going to be how we're going to combo win basically every game with the Gitrog. So to start off, we've got our card draw, which is basically just Adnaz, Necro, and then Bazaar of Baghdad. This is a land that taps, you draw 2 cards, and then you discard 3 cards, which is not an issue when discarding lands causes us to draw cards off the Gitrog. Then we've got our combos, which I'll get to in a bit, but we've got our fast mana because we do need to get Gitrog out as fast as possible since we can't win the game without it. So all the typical rituals you would expect to see in the Golgari colors. We've got a bunch of lands, more lands than you would usually expect because again, we're going to be discarding these to draw cards. Some standouts are Dakmor Salvage, which is a combo piece I'll get to later. Homeward Path, because again, we cannot win the game without Gitrog monster, so if our opponents steal it from us with like a Gilded Drake or something, we do need a way to get it back. Lake of the Dead, which you have to sack a swamp when it comes in or it gets sacrificed itself, and then you can tap it for either black or you can tap and sack a swamp to add quadruple black. Phyrexian Tower, which sacks a creature to generate double black, and Urza's Saga. Then we've got our protection, so Veil, Autumn's Veil, and Allosaurus Shepherd and Cavernous Souls mean that our Gitrog can't get countered, and Sylvan's Safekeeper keeps it alive while it's in play, gets rid of removal spells. Then we got a bunch of ramp, including Jiraga Tree Speaker, bunch of removal. We instantly lose to any graveyard hate like Rest in Peace, so we do need ways of getting rid of that. We've got Abrupt Decay, Trophy, Beseiju, and then some creature removal, so we can get rid of like Dothy Voidwalker, for example. So Cabal Pit, Dismember, Fatal Push, Grist, and Orcish Bowmasters. Then we've got our own stacks cards. So we do have a Chains of Mephistopheles, Collector Oof, Dothy, Opposition Agent, Bowmasters. We've got Eldrazi Titans that shuffle our graveyard back into our deck, which is going to be relevant later when we talk about combos. Ramunok Excavator, which allows us to play lands from our graveyard. And then we've got a whole boatload of tutors, which tutor either for anything or for creatures primarily. And then let's discuss the combos. So how are we actually comboing with Gitrog? So remember, whenever a land gets put into the graveyard, we draw a card. That's the main thing to remember. So the big combo card here is Dakmor Salvage. So basically, instead of drawing a card, we can dredge it. So if this ever hits the graveyard, it triggers the Gitrog monster. Then we dredge the Dakmor Salvage instead of drawing a card normally. If we happen to dredge in any additional lands off of the 2 that we mill over, we will then draw more cards, but primarily we need a way to discard the Dakmor Salvage. So it doesn't really matter how we discard it as long as we discard it. So we've got a few discard spells here. We've got Putrid Imp, Oblivion Crown, and Noose Constrictor. There are other discard outlets that we could play besides just these 3. So if you prefer those over these ones, or if you just want more discard spells, feel free to add them to the deck. So we then discard the Dakmor Salvage. It hits the graveyard, triggering Gitrog monster. We then dredge it instead of drawing card normally. We then discard it again, triggering the Gitrog monster, etc. We mill our entire deck over / draw our entire deck, however we want to do it. Similarly, Golgari Grave Troll and Life from the Loam will be other dredgers that we can use rather than just Dakmor Salvage. So these ones don't guarantee putting a land in the graveyard, but they are fairly decent at getting there. So then what are going to be our main combos? So obviously we're just milling everything over until eventually we get through our entire deck. But then what do we do when we get there? We also do have the Eldrazi Titans to make sure that we don't actually mill out. So the Noose Constrictor becomes infinitely huge off of discarding to its ability. The Oblivion Crown, if we attach it to, let's say, the Gitrog or just anything else, is basically the aura version of Noose Constrictor and can kill our opponent by using the Oblivion Crown. And Putrid Imp is just a discard outlet. So any of these discard outlets plus Dakmor or just enough dredging that we can keep hitting lands into the graveyard causes us to infinitely mill our whole deck, which then also triggers our Eldrazi Titans because we're going to hit them at some point, putting our graveyard back into our deck, and then we can keep repeating over and over and over. So some discard spells that are not shown here if you want to follow along at home. There is Wild Mongrel, Scourge Familiar, Iula's Influence, which is the one that discards to make bear tokens. Olivia's Dragoon is another one. Let's just actually bring that up. So these are the Gitrog monster combos. So they all go off with Dakmor Salvage, as you can see. So Wild Mongrel is another one that gets +1/+1. It also just changes colors. Scourge Familiar generates black mana, although it itself costs 5, so it's difficult to get in. Iula's Influence, discard a land, make a bear. Olivia's Dragoon, discard, get flying. Patchwork Gnomes, discard, regenerate, is also 3 mana, so it's a bit more expensive than usual. There's Una's Prowler, discard, it gets -power. So there's lots and lots of cards that have the ability to just discard for free, so any one of those will work with Dakmor Salvage. So one of the things to note about the Gitrog is that it's obviously very fragile. We have a 5 mana commander that we need to play very, very quickly, and we can't allow our opponents to counter or remove it from the battlefield. We also do need to assemble multiple combo pieces in Dakmor Salvage and a discard outlet of some kind. And then we need to be able to go through that combo without our opponent having a way to, again, either counter anything that we're doing, exile or otherwise kill Gitrog monster, or snipe stuff out of the graveyard. So anyways, besides what I think is a fairly straightforward combo of Dakmor Salvage plus the discard outlet and Gitrog, there are other ways of generating infinite mana or doing other combo shenanigans that are more complicated to go through. So for example, let's say we have a Lotus Petal, right? So we can cast the Lotus Petal, and then let's say we have a way to discard, right? So let's discard any land, doesn't matter which one. We trigger the Gitrog, then we hold priority, then we use one of our discards to discard one of our Titans, right? So Kozilek or Ulamog. So now we have a shuffle trigger. So we shuffle our graveyard back into our deck. Then we discard and dredge Dakmor Salvage, right? We stack the draw trigger below the shuffle, and we resolve the shuffle. So we discard and then dredge the Dakmor. We put the draw trigger below the shuffle again, but we hold priority on the shuffle. Then we crack the Lotus Petal for any color. Then we resolve the shuffle trigger and all 3 draw triggers. So let's go through that one more time to explain. Cast Lotus Petal, discard any land and hold priority. So we have a draw trigger on the stack. Discard one of our Eldrazi Titans, shuffle. Discard and dredge the Dakmor Salvage, stacking the draw below the shuffle, and resolve the shuffle trigger. Discard and dredge Dakmor again, stacking the draw below the shuffle, hold priority on the shuffle. Crack the Lotus Petal for any color, resolve the shuffle, and draw all 3 draws, and resolve all the draw triggers. So we have the same board state as before, but we have an extra mana floating from the Lotus Petal, and then we can repeat. Same deal with, for example, Dark Ritual, same thing essentially, but we use Dark Ritual instead of Lotus Petal. This also applies to anything else like Cabal Ritual, etc. Then there is the crop rotation loop. So if we come down here to our tutors, we've got crop rotation, which is as an additional cost to cast the spell, sack a land, search your library for a land card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So remember crop rotation. So we once again use one of our discard outlets to discard a land. We hold priority. We discard a Titan. We resolve the shuffle. We discard and dredge Dakmor. We put the draw trigger under the shuffle and resolve the shuffle. Then we repeat the first 3 steps until there's 6 draw triggers on the stack. Then we resolve the 2 draws to draw the land and the Titan, and we have an empty library, right? We discard any non-land card off of our discard effects. We discard the Titan, we shuffle. We discard a land, we draw a card. We cast crop rotation. We sack a land and we resolve the draw trigger, but we hold priority on the spell. Then we discard the Eldrazi Titan, we shuffle. We resolve the crop rotation, finding the whatever land it is that we're finding. Then we draw, then we discard the Titan, then we draw again, and then we tap the land for mana. So these are very, very complicated loops, and it's going to be pretty difficult to demonstrate what exactly it is that we're doing without visual aids, but I urge you to basically just try to maybe proxy this, or you can also take this Moxfield deck link that's going to be in the description, and you can play test it just to see what exactly it is that we're doing. But yes, these are very, very complicated loops that involve a lot of steps and holding priority and casting things in a very specific sequence in order to wind up with added mana or added card draw, etc. Now, when it comes to actually winning the game, we can use various loops to win the game, but basically we can use Orcish Bowmasters and we can loop the Bowmasters. So let's say we go cast Bowmasters, ping anybody, doesn't matter. Then we discard a land, hold priority on the draw trigger, we discard an Eldrazi Titan, we shuffle, we discard and dredge Dakmor, doing the same thing. We repeat the same steps. We discard and dredge Dakmor. We draw, we shuffle. Then we cast any instant to get rid of Orcish Bowmasters, like Culling the Weak, Dismember, Fatal Push, whatever it is. We need to get it into our graveyard. Then we resolve the shuffle trigger, we put Bowmasters back into our deck, and then we draw, right? So basically, any of these combos that we're doing, we're trying to empty out our library and then put ourselves into a position where we can selectively discard whatever we want into our graveyard, shuffle it back into our deck with an Eldrazi Titan, and then draw by stacking it so that the draw triggers resolve after we shuffle everything back, so that we draw everything that we need and then repeat the loop. We can do also wins by, for example, so whatever loop that we wind up with, we can always wind up with more mana than we started with and recasting the same spells. So we can either win with Bowmasters to just kill everyone, or we can use Assassin's Trophy to destroy all of the opposing permanents. That's another one that we can do. And there's so many more things to do, but they're all super complicated. I don't want to dwell on it forever. There's also a lot more to the deck, and basically this deck is far more complicated than even I could ever deal with. So if you're interested, I do have a link in the primer here. So if you click on the primer, this will link to a primer by Benningai, Gitrog Server, Kibizan, Leptis, Noobzers, and Scoot. And if you bring that up, they have a fantastic primer on the Gitrog monster that goes through all the various steps, loops, etc., every single thing that's in the deck, including individual card discussions, how to win the game, how to execute all of these loops, etc. So if you're interested in more of an in-depth explanation, I highly recommend reading their guide on the deck. As is, I think that basically covers the basics of how the Gitrog monster operates. So once again, we're a pretty glass cannon, all-in fast combo deck that's just trying to turbo ramp Ritual into Gitrog monster as fast as possible and eventually assemble a loop that involves a discard outlet, Dakmor Salvage, and an Eldrazi Titan that will shuffle our graveyard back into our deck. So those are the cards that you are looking for when you begin. Anyways, that brings us to the end of the primer, so I hope you've enjoyed it. That is the Gitrog monster in EDH.